mean, the In-Q-Tel is exactly what you said. It's the CIA's venture capital firm, and they actually provided some of the seed funding for Google. There is some very, very good connections, maybe not direct, but tangential connections between the In-Q-Tel and Facebook. And of course, many people may know that DARPA actually had a project that they called LifeLog that they were working on in the 90s, early 2000s, that officially the LifeLog program ended on the same day that Mark Zuckerberg is said to have launched Facebook. So there's some people who suspect that because of this In-Q-Tel connection, that Facebook was from the beginning kind of a DARPA program to map connections on people, which is what they originally said LifeLog was about. So yeah, In-Q-Tel has been around, I mean, providing funding. I think the company maybe Niantic or Symantec, the company behind Pokemon Go as well, which was a big craze a few years ago, and that was really the first introduction most people had to augmented reality. That company also received CIA In-Q-Tel funding.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.
Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 271. I'm talking with Derrick Broze. He is as I like to call him, a guerrilla journalist. He's with the Conscious Resistance Network, and some other websites. He does a lot of good work. We're going to talk about what Derrick has noticed about Peter Thiel, Palantir, and the Surveillance Society. And, Derrick, before we get into this, I do want to acknowledge Ross Ulbricht has been pardoned and Leonard Peltier's sentence has been commuted. So we got some very good news on that front. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, those are both good things this week, and interesting that they came from two different administrations.
Yeah. And, while Peltier is still apparently going to be under house arrest, he can at least be with his family, and I don't know, maybe he can have, he can hug his kids, hug his grandchildren, or what, and see his family. So that's good. So
Yeah.
anyway, Derrick, you've talked a lot about Peter Thiel, and you've been on all of this surveillance stuff. You were on, things like immunity passports and all kinds of just big tech stuff that's going to be used to spy on everybody. What can you tell us about that? Where does all this begin with Peter Thiel, Palantir, In-Q-Tel, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a good place to start as far as Peter Thiel's. For those who don't know, Peter Thiel, of course, is this big tech billionaire. He goes back to PayPal, one of the several co-founders of PayPal. They nicknamed themselves the PayPal Mafia. And a lot of those people continue on today in the big tech world and into Trump's administration, his second term now. And Peter Thiel, so he's been involved with the early days of PayPal, Palantir, and Palantir is, of course, the private surveillance firm that does contract with U.S. Intelligence and military intelligence and Israel and other countries around the world. And, basically they're part of the military industrial complex and led the surveillance state. And so there's those obvious concerns. Peter Thiel himself is also a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. So for those who are familiar with that, then that might be a red flag to you. He also, besides being involved with the Bilderberg Group and Palantir, he going back to Stanford, where he was a student originally, I think in like the 80s. He wrote the Stanford Review with some of his other big tech partners that have come on to power. And back then, he was kind of, and I guess in his earlier days, calling himself a libertarian and sort of exploring libertarian ideas. And in the mainstream media, they still will, I think on purpose to sort of defame and misdirect people from what libertarianism is, they'll still kind of refer to him as some type of libertarian. I think it's clear he's not. For me, just even the fact that like his wealth is largely built off, government contracts and things of that sort. But even beyond that, I mean, what he really advocates and the beliefs he really has fit more neatly into the technocratic philosophy, the idea that technocrats, that technological experts or scientific experts should micromanage society. And the original movement of technocrats back in the 1920s and 30s in the US and Canada, they would say things like the machines would help them centrally plan everything, and that they would have energy credits to give out to everybody, and it would just be this utopian world. They admitted that it would involve certain losses of individual liberties and freedoms to achieve this. And I think that Peter Thiel, I think it's quite clear that Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and other folks like them are essentially the modern technocrats, and are now, with the second Trump administration, getting further entrenched into the halls of power. And not to say that they weren't in the Biden administration, or they wouldn't have been with Kamala Harris, because as I wrote, I had an article right before the election called "Election 2024: Zionist Technocrats versus Zionist Technocrats," and it literally was just an article that listed all of the various big backers of Kamala Harris and how they are connected to this ideology, as well as Zionism, and the same thing for Trump. And on Kamala Harris's side, you had Peter Thiel's co-founder of Palantir, Alex Karp, who is also a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. He was supporting Kamala Harris. And you also had the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, who is also a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, supporting Kamala Harris. And then you had Peter Thiel, steering committee of the member of the Bilderberg Group, supporting Donald Trump. And so it's not to say that, if this wouldn't have happened under Kamala Harris or any other candidate, but I do think that Peter Thiel is kind of part of this long game that has been played. Peter Thiel funded Donald Trump's first campaign as well. He claimed he didn't support it the second time around. There was some indirect contributions he gave, but not himself directly. But he did support Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate, vice president now, J.D. Vance, who was before that a senator in Ohio. Peter Thiel was basically the only reason he even won. He funded him to the tune of millions of dollars. And so, and also J.D. Vance, claims he heard Peter Thiel give a speech at Yale, and that inspired him, and they end up collaborating together. You've got another guy named Ken Howry in Trump's administration. I can't remember his exact position. And Jim O'Neill, I think he's second over at HHS, worked for the Thiel Fellowship. I mean, I could go on and on. There's just numerous examples of how many people are connected to this guy, Peter Thiel, in the new Trump administration. So I think Peter Thiel really represents this kind of faux libertarian, populist technocratic movement.
Yeah, it looks like Ken Howry is going to be the ambassador to Denmark. And also, just to clarify for people, Palantir is spelled Palantir. It's comes from a name in the Lord of the Rings, curiously enough.
Which is like an all-seeing eye, basically,
Yeah, Derek, I do have to ask, do you think maybe the seeds were sown for this actually, during the Bush administration? Because, Bush wanted to, fight the war on terror, and, if you see something, say something, and all that nonsense that came about it during those days.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something that just popped up because of Trump or anything like that, or even with Peter Thiel. He's just kind of the current expression of that right now. I mean, we could look at people like, for example, Henry Kissinger's died last year, right, or the year before. He died at 100 years old, and they just recently posthumously published a book of his co-written with Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google and steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group. This is their third book that I think they wrote together, and the first one to be published after Kissinger died. And he was talking all about AI and, of course, transhumanism, et cetera. And they really do the typical thing like they've done for decades, which is couch these discussions in terms that make it sound very utopian. That's going to be great and everything. But my point here is that people like Henry Kissinger long preceded Peter Thiel and Donald Trump's, and of course they themselves, Henry Kissinger particularly, he was infiltrating and working with all the different administrations. And, this movement really, you could go back before Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, et cetera, current kind of crop of technocrats to the 1970s. Kissinger's there. You also got Zbigniew Brzezinski, who, of course, was, involved in Afghanistan and a number of other areas. He was also involved in U.S. politics, national security advisor. But he wrote a book called America Between Two Ages, the Technotronic Era. And so instead of using the word technocratic, he called it technotronic, which is essentially the same thing, though. I mean, he described a world where individual liberty and privacy and freedom will be curtailed in the name of this, technotronic world that he said, where we're using technology and things to make the world more efficient, essentially, which is coincidentally, Elon Musk is behind this Department of Government Efficiency. Obviously, a general goal that I think most libertarian, freedom-minded people would support, but I do think there's bigger things at play behind that.
Yeah, when I hear technotronic, I always think of that band, that did that song "Pump Up the Jam." But
Oh yeah.
yeah, but and weren't these also funded up by In-Q-Tel, which is, apparently a venture capital firm that was started by the CIA. So the CIA has gotten into venture capital. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, the In-Q-Tel is exactly what you said. It's the CIA's venture capital firm, and they actually provided some of the seed funding for Google. There is some very, very good connections, maybe not direct, but tangential connections between the In-Q-Tel and Facebook. Um, and of course, many people may know that DARPA actually had a project that they called LifeLog that they were working on in the 90s, early 2000s, that officially the LifeLog program ended on the same day that Mark Zuckerberg is said to have launched Facebook. So there's some people who suspect that because of this In-Q-Tel connection, that Facebook was from the beginning kind of a DARPA program to map connections on people, which is what they originally said LifeLog was about. So yeah, In-Q-Tel has been around. I mean, providing funding. I think the company maybe Niantic or Symantec, the company behind Pokemon Go as well, which was a big craze a few years ago, and that was really the first introduction most people had to augmented reality. That company also received CIA and Q-Tel funding. And I think that was probably just for that purpose, for them to sort of study how easy they could and how people respond to augmented reality and getting people to like go out into the real world and chase down fictional characters, but more than that, the location tracking and things like that. So yeah, you'll see this name In-Q-Tel pop up, and you actually just reminded me of another connection. I just finished writing an article. I write weekly articles at The Last American Vagabond, besides doing my own content at theconsciousresistance.com. And I just finished an article right now about this whole Stargate project, which was just announced by Trump the other day on the same day that he was freeing Ross. And this project, the short version of it is it's a $500 billion investment by Oracle, SoftBank, and OpenAI into AI infrastructure that they say will help them develop mRNA vaccines, using things like AI to do a blood scan and detect potential precursors to cancer, and then using that to create gene specific vaccines, or as they call them, vaccines. I don't know if that's really what they are, using mRNA technology. So this is a big thing. A lot of people, of course, like, oh, what the heck? This doesn't sound good. So I start to look into this whole program, and the people behind it, Larry Ellison at Oracle, Sam Altman, OpenAI, and there's a whole lot to say about those gentlemen on their own. But I did find that there's a Peter Thiel connection there as well, because Peter Thiel and Oracle, the tech company, they partnered together, I think just last year, on AI infrastructure to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. The head of Oracle, Larry Ellison, who was part of this Stargate project, and Peter Thiel have been dining and kind of in Trump's inner circle since at least 2018. And yeah, there's some other business connections there, but so Peter Thiel is also tied into this whole project as well. And overall, what I see, what many people are celebrating, and I think even people who are just falling for it in the liberty movement, they think that this is like, okay, it might not exactly be the Ron Paul movement, but it's something close to it. It's getting away from the insanity of the left, and we're winning, and Maha and all this kind of stuff. But in reality, I mean, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be good things, like Ross got freed, and even today, there's some things about JFK that Trump's announcing. We'll see what actually happens, right? We have to wait for actions, but it doesn't mean there won't be any potential good. In fact, I've been arguing recently that now that the Trump term has started, they're going to throw us a couple crumbs from the table, a couple easy wins that, like, hey, we're going to unban TikTok, we're going to free Ross, stuff like that don't cost Trump much. But the bigger picture is that much of the same things we've seen from the left are going to continue and probably expand even faster, because there are a lot of people who make excuses for Trump and who will turn a blind eye. Well, because he freed Ross, or he freed the January 6th, prisoners, or whatever, or, and people like myself and Whitney Webb and others who report on this are just constantly getting called black-pilled. But yeah, so what I think is really this co-opting of the freedom movement, the misdirecting of it, and to thinking that we have achieved some big, huge victory and that the fight's over and now the good guys are in power. And so we can just sit back. And a big part of that is all the tech giants getting behind Trump. And, they're doing it, of course, for financial reasons. They're going to make a shitload of money under Trump. They're going to get all kinds of great contracts because they're being buddying up to him and stuff now. But I don't think the long-term implications are going to be good for liberty.
Yeah, I don't think so either. The whole Ron Paul Donald Trump connection. It's really wild that basically a personality cult could just be led to, having another personality take it over. And
Yeah.
it's like a smoker switching cigarette brands.
Can I say something about that, man? Because this is something I don't know if you saw. I actually got to interview Ron Paul last week, and I asked him about if he ever actually did endorse Trump, because there was, I think there's been a lot of people, like there's the Dave Smiths and some of these other people who are mainly, I think, just popular on Twitter, that I've never really seen, do a lot for liberty from my personal, perspective. But they have a big soapbox. And so those people and Tom Woods and others, like they went towards Trump and pretty much told all their libertarian followers to go that way. And I think many of those people acted as if Ron Paul was saying the same thing, even, just because, okay, Elon mentioned Ron Paul once or twice, or they shared some memes about him. In fact, I think it was a concerted effort by that side, like you said, to sort of co-opt the legacy of Ron Paul and pull them towards Trump. And, there are some more cynical people that have asked the question of like, like let's say, for example, people who are even skeptical of Ron Paul are like, well, maybe that was the whole plan, build up this movement and then just hand it over to Trump. I don't necessarily see that, whatever flaws Ron Paul may have, but I do think that there is somewhat of a through line from late Rothbard, paleo-conservative, paleo-libertarianism to the MAGA movement. I definitely think that there is some overlap there. And I'm not saying that's Ron Paul's fault or it was anything done like with planning necessarily, but there is that overlap. And for me, it's just been interesting and sad at the same time to see a lot of, you've been doing this for a long time. You've been in the movement longer than I have. And I've been, active for about 15 years now. And it's just a lot of people who I feel should know better and who are around in the Ron Paul days, 2008 or 2012, all that's time. It just to see them now just going towards Trump, and not even in the sense of like, well, it's a strategic thing and I'm kind of, biting my lip and, closing my eyes while I support Trump and hoping for the best, but like embracing it as if this is like, this is the real liberty movement now. And I just, I don't buy any of that at all.
Yeah, I don't buy it either, Derek. It's rather yeah, it's rather interesting. It really goes it's funny. Rothbard actually was on the one of the founding editors of Liberty magazine in 1987. And it was around 89 or 90 he broke from that. And I think there was this period where the Berlin Wall came down, and so I think there were some people, some of those people thought, okay, now that the Berlin Wall's down, we can end the Cold War and go back to what they talk about the old right, the first the early Bob Taft, the right, that existed before World War II. And that's always been this fantasy that they have, and this is the closest thing they have to it now. Of course, the end of the foreign interventionism died really with the first Gulf War, but they've held on to that ever since. But how you can be a libertarian, for example, and ever get behind Pat Buchanan, I have no idea. The guy used to work for Nixon. It's
Yeah, I see Trump's definitely. I see what you're saying about the old right. I definitely think that with the Trump MAGA, it's something that has at best like traces of libertarianism in it, but it's to me more aligned with nationalism. And I'm not even like, I don't even really necessarily fault people who are nationalists to some degree, although I generally see it as just another form of statism. But it's definitely like, even just for example, stupid things like renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Like, what is that even like? Who is that supposed to appeal to? Somebody, to me, and just this is just how I see it. Somebody who's super lowbrow, that like literally that's just like, yeah, I'm gonna, rah, 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 America. The ocean is renamed for America. Like, who the hell cares? But at the same time, it's like that's appealing to a certain base of people who just want, like, I don't know, America, no matter what, and don't really, in my view, seem to have any foundational principles. It's just like Trump, make America first, except for when it comes to Israel, make America great, and make America first, except for Israel, and just things like that. And then ignoring all the other telltale signs. Again, that's not to say there won't be anything good, but overall, I do think that what makes Trump a lot different, the Trump movement, MAGA movement, at least I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that the difference between that and say Ron Paul's movement, or at least Ron Paul and his actions that inspired the libertarian, anarchist, voluntarist movements in the US and elsewhere, that it's not cult like. Of course, we all appreciate Ron Paul and people are really grateful for him. But if Ron Paul started turning to a status, like, we're going to call him out. If he started just saying crazy things, even in his old age, I mean, at 89, like, he's, I think, a lot more principled. And even though sometimes, he might kind of have, he's just older now. He's not as narrow and straightforward with his thinking maybe as he used to be. I think he's still a way more inspiring and principled person than Trump is. Trump, anything Trump says is just like either bragging about himself or just, I don't know, rambling about all kinds of nonsense. So to me, I think that's a big difference where a lot of the MAGA people, they won't criticize Trump and they're kind of afraid to call out, be like, I don't know, it's just cultish to me. And not to say the left doesn't have their own problems with that. It's just, I do think that's a difference between most people in the libertarian movement. But again, it is sad to still see people going towards Trump who used to claim to care about liberty.
Well, the forgotten element in all this, Derek, is Trump was really, and it was other people like that who were initially promoting the coronavirus in January of 2020. I mean, it was, I think, the last week of January that Trump says, okay, I'm going to shut. And it seems like to me, Trump was really promoting that just to demonize global trade and demonize, global travel. He just wanted to isolate the country. And this is one way to say, okay, all the other countries are bad. So we got to shut them down to keep these viruses out. And eventually, that backfired on him. And there was even people like Tucker Carlson were saying, you got to do something about this early on. There were very, very few people who really rejected it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the issues with the short-term memory of people of what you just said there about the beginning of COVID, but then also things like Trump giving Fauci an award before he left office, like on his last day in office. I actually had somebody tell me the other day, well, we didn't know who Fauci was by that point. I was like, this is December 2020. It was clear that Fauci was the driving force behind this whole 2 weeks to flatten the curve thing. And Trump had even been critical to him prior to that, but still in the end gave him an award on the way out. And then, of course, the whole Operation Warp Speed, which myself, Whitney Webb, and others were reporting from the very beginning that this was a military operation and that Trump put big pharma executives from GlaxoSmithKline and others to head this whole thing, to be at the very top of it. And it was a big pharma operation about, like you said, supporting. Maybe he didn't full on lock down the country in terms of commanding everybody to do it, but he definitely didn't stop it and prevent it and played along with the whole thing one way or the other. And and then still to this day continues to brag about it. So, I mean, I don't see how people can ignore that. And I don't know. I mean, there's discussion and sort of rumblings in the background. Maybe they're trying to do something with this whole bird flu narrative.
Yeah.
Would Trump go for it again? I wouldn't be surprised if he did. I mean, and at the same time, like, I also, just because I'm super suspicious of all this, I wouldn't be surprised if let's say part of the world did push that and Trump pushed back, and that even sent the signal to more people that, like, this is it. He's fighting back. He's on our side. This is the real hero. But I just think that we can't ignore the backing of Trump by the Zionists and all the other influences I've already outlined here. Even when good things happen, I mean, again, we should sit and look at those good things and say, wow, okay, that's better than, the worst consequences, but it doesn't change these other factors. And so we need to remain on guard and alert and skeptical of that. And yeah, I think that while the libertarian movement is currently celebrating Ross being freed, which is an amazing thing, as sort of like the highlight and the biggest moment in Libertarian Party's history, and obviously, like, I value Ross's life and he should be free. At the same time, I don't really know if that's like such a great thing in terms of, sure, the Libertarian Party has been mentioned in national media now about Ross being freed and that this was sort of negotiated on that half. But for example, I was just listening to an interview Angela of the LP with Reason for the Just Asking Questions podcast it was just released yesterday. And she was kind of explaining more in there about how the whole negotiation and everything went with Trump, and pretty much she's making it clear that, like, they called her, she talked with Trump, and she pretty much was like, I can't endorse you, but I can tell you how to appeal to my party and how to attract them, give them these things, and you can compete with us. And to me, that's just like, okay, again, Ross is freed, wonderful, amazing, great. Angela played a role in that, sure, but it also just feels slimy. I don't know, something about that, like, kind of just negotiating with the other party to give the party, and I'm not even a member of the party. I think the party has a lot of flaws in it, but still, it's like, if you remember that party, I know there were a lot of people who maybe did go to Trump, but others felt like, hey, even if I wasn't happy with this particular candidate, I'm not going to sell out my party and go vote for the Republicans. I'd be curious just to hear your thoughts on that, man. I mean, what did you think about that whole effort to push the Libertarian Party towards Trump and vote for him and stuff like that?
I wasn't in favor of it, uh, and it really, it's funny when Chase got the nomination, the first thing I pointed out is we've got 5 people who are 70 plus, and then we've got the 39-year-old. It's this is our chance to appeal to the younger voters more than any. It just, yeah, and to me, Chase isn't perfect either, but he's a very articulate speaker. As I've said, he just sounds presidential. He's not been the best the LP's had, but he's not the worst either. But I just think, you've got to go out and support the guy you nominated. And as I've said, can you imagine, the Yankees, going out and bashing the Dodgers after the World Series? It's like, you lost, and now you're going to talk about the guy who beat your candidate. What's that say about you if your candidate lost to this guy and you're criticizing the guy who won? It's just, I, there's a lot of things I don't, there's a lot of things that are just so weird right now. It's definitely one of the strangest things I've ever seen happen in politics. And I wonder, too, if, where is Thiel's money going here? One person, we also didn't mention, was that Blake Masters, who ran for Senate in 2022 in Arizona. And Ron Paul actually did come out and say, this Blake Masters guy is really solid. And he had one blog post on LouRockwell.com that I could find. Maybe there were others that got deleted, but I didn't really know how libertarian this guy was. But
Yeah, I'm not familiar with him, but Ron Paul endorsed him.
yeah, Ron Paul went out and endorsed him, and said, yeah, you got to vote for this guy in Arizona. And when Arizona was considered, very much Arizona, was considered very much a state that was kind of up for grabs, and the Libertarian Party's candidate dropped out toward the end after early voting had already started. So it was a pointless move at that point. But, and there were people calling for him to drop out.
Because of the Ron Paul endorsement?
I think partially because of the Ron Paul endorsement, but also Dave Smith came out and said this guy named Blake Masters. But, if you're going to, there's no point in dropping out when early voting is started. That's just ridiculous, and you're on the ballot. So I don't think it possibly changed even one vote.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really understand that whole. I mean, again, like, I'm not a member of the LP, but if I was, and I believe Dave Smith is, and he was all in for a while and was even like, act like he was going to run for office.
Yeah.
I don't get the purpose then of, because I mean, the thing is, the D's and the R's, we know that they're just corporate parties, but they have loyalty to their parties at least. I mean, they're not going to turn around and go endorse somebody from a different party, even if they don't like the people, even if they felt, this. And I'm not even saying that's a good trait per se of parties, because they're just, I think that's the problem with party over, choosing party over principles and things like that. But generally speaking, if you're going to be a party, then you should have some allegiance to the candidates and, supporting them.
Yeah, it's definitely, I don't know. Sometimes I wish political parties didn't exist either, but at the same time, I don't know if you really can make them wave a magic wand and make them disappear.
Yeah, I don't think so.
We can quit subsidizing them to the level that we do. Yeah, and the sad truth, Derek, too, is a Ron Paul endorsement really doesn't carry that much weight. I mean, he endorsed that Don Huffines in that governor's race in 2022, and Huffines got less than 12% of the vote in the primary, so.
Yeah, I mean, he influences obviously a certain crowd of people, and of course, those of us who were influenced by him over the last decade or so are grateful for him. But I do think that generally speaking, his I don't want to say his moment is past. Well, maybe that is true. Like, not to say he's obviously alive. He's here. People are grateful for him. A lot of people were excited to see my interview with him and stuff like that. But as far as like what Ron Paul's saying influencing the popular zeitgeist, of the moment, not really happening. That's Trump's, Trump's moment now as far as
Yeah.
that goes.
And I think a lot of I think a lot of other Ron Paul people did go over to just that they went over and became anarchists or something else instead.
A lot of us became anarchists. Some maybe stayed in the LP. Maybe some tried the whole Ron Paul with the Republican Party thing, and some of those became MAGA, for whatever reason. Because
Yeah.
it's hard for me to like. I get into this a lot with people online because I've noticed this thing recently that and it's not even just recent, but it's something that's popping up in the last week as I'm saying certain things about Trump that people will say, especially around Ross. Like, I'm grateful Ross is free, but I'm still like, I'm not going to support Trump. And people will say, oh, yeah, you must enjoy losing and things like that. Oh, you and your silly principles. There's this kind of sentiment that, like, by trying to stand by principles, either you're full of yourself, you think you're so high and mighty. It's like they get, it's like a way of making fun of you for actually trying to stand on something. But then the other thing is, oh, well, enjoy your principles, but you're going to continue to lose. And meanwhile, we're going to win. And the implication to me there is that to win, and in terms of politics at least, then you have to give up your principles or at least compromise them to some degree. And that's what we call winning. And obviously people, they look at results. So a lot of people, they think that they're coming at this from a pragmatic stance. And well, I'm worried more about the ends, not necessarily the means. That to me, I think, is where we've seen so many people fall astray. And that's honestly what has appealed to me, made libertarianism appeal to me over the last 15 years, is that there were principles and values, and people, at least when I first started learning about it, appeared to be uncompromising in those principles and stood on them even when the left and the right would compromise their principles. Unfortunately, doesn't seem to be the case so much with some people who call themselves libertarians.
Yeah, I don't know where our movement's going right now. It's really I can look at also the people who called themselves libertarians who just completely sold out on the whole coronavirus narrative, and and a lot of times they're now pretending that they didn't well, maybe I shouldn't say sell out, but just turned against the movement. You know,
Yeah, well, I think that's partly because the libertarian movement's been afraid of so-called conspiracy theories for a long time.
yeah,
We saw this during the 9/11 days. Like, I was just starting to get active in 2010, learning about End the Fed movement, getting involved with that, and then learning about 9/11 later. And I saw even back then that there was some of the libertarians that, okay, they were willing to talk about and the Federal Reserve because of Ron Paul, but then maybe less open to 9/11. I saw that with people like Tom Woods, at least back in the day. Maybe he's more open to it now. I don't know. But yeah, so there's definitely the same thing with certain libertarians who are like, not willing to question certain things with COVID because those were deemed conspiracy theory in the beginning. And then with time, as they've been proven true, I think some have come over. But yeah, I think that points to a larger problem. That's one of the things that our mutual friend John Bush told me, or I saw him speak in January. What was it? No, it was 9/11, 2011 at Liberty Fest in New York City. And he gave a speech that was something to the effect of, Ron Paul talks about the Federal Reserve movement. Libertarians are okay talking about the Federal Reserve. Why can't we talk about 9/11? It was just sort of calling out and saying libertarians should be open to that. But I've noticed that a lot, especially with the more academic type of libertarians. Like, they try to be, respectable and professional and this sort of thing. And so they seem like they don't want to be associated with anything that could be deemed conspiratorial.
well, I do think there are some very crackpot because you do get into some crackpot
Of
conspiracy.
course, of course. There definitely are.
I don't that are a little crazy, but sometimes I do think the conspiracy theories can serve as a distraction. If somebody opposes the Patriot Act, I'm glad that they oppose the Patriot Act, and I don't care what whether they believe the World Trade Center was an inside job or not. The most important thing is that they opposed the Patriot Act.
No, I
Because
hear that. I hear that as well. But I do think that it can be a limitation in a libertarian sort of worldview if we understand that the state is this harmful institution and don't also understand that the people who control the state will conspire together to achieve their ends and goals. And sometimes that can be things that get labeled conspiracy theories, and then like including COVID. Like, we know for a fact people were lying to us about the
yeah,
most basic thing, the efficacy of the vaccines, the safety, et cetera. Well, people had to get together and plan that out and cover up the facts that we know are there. And some of those people are in government, and so to me, it's an important aspect. But you're correct. Like, generally speaking, if somebody gets the non-aggression principle, if they're not going to use violence against me, then we probably have more in common than not. And if they aren't necessarily as open-minded as I might prefer in other areas, so be it, as long as they're not going to use force or violence against me.
Yeah, I mean, usually what I ask, when people, just say that's a conspiracy theory, I'll just say, well, do you think that Vince McMahon's wrestling is real? It's and hey,
It's funny now how,
but like little kids will watch that on TV and they do think it's real.
yeah. It's funny you say that, though, just because of how intertwined, Vince McMahon, of course, coming from the WWF, WWE now, how intertwined they are with the Trump cabinet as well. With his wife, Linda McMahon, is now a part of Trump's cabinet, and Trump, was in the WWE a few times, having these different wrestling scenes. So it's just the theater of wrestling and theater of politics have now merged.
There are a lot of similarities, Derek. And if you remember that, one thing that Jack Hunter said, he said Trump really would be one of my favorite wrestlers if he wasn't running for president. It's like, I mean, there is a connection there because it just does seem to be, a theater to just get everybody stirred up and riled up to oppose who they're supposed to oppose, and it's like the crowd's being programmed to like somebody or hate somebody, and
Exactly.
it's really, and it's just like they're all just the crowds are just being pulled by these strings being pulled by these. The question I always ask myself, we know the wrestling's fake, but are the announcers, are they getting scripts too, or are the announcers pretty much improvising? That's what I wonder about. It's you find out there are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and one thing about, just as far as the whole theater of it and the manipulation of it all, I mean, this going back to the big tech side of things, and these technocrats and their view. I mean, we live in what one of my journalist friends calls an algorithmic ghetto. Now, like, as far as the internet goes, like, people don't necessarily always recognize how much of our lives are influenced and manipulated by algorithms on the internet, and depending on, obviously, what they're showing you, what you're searching for, stuff like that, but also the news that they pop up in your various feeds, and the studies that have been done that show for sure that they can trigger our emotions, whether that's sadness, joy, anger, etc. I mean, we really are, the theater has gone from just something that we're watching, but to now something that is impacting and affecting us.
Yeah, and search engines and all that stuff have just gotten so bad. I mean, they're trying to lead you to certain things.
Well, they're also trying to lead you now to the AI generated responses as like the one response. Google's head of Google, I think it was a Google CEO, it wasn't Eric Schmidt, but one of the other ones, has said in the past that they eventually want there to be only one search result when you search, the correct one. And so they're going to tell you sooner or later, this is the one truth, the one answer there to this question that you have. Yeah.
Well, the one thing I've noticed, now is that quotes are basically useless. I mean, every once in a while, I might hear a song and I hear, I hear the lyrics, so I'll take maybe 6 words and I'll put that in quotes, and
Mhm.
I'm trying to find the song. And it used to be you would find that song, but now it just tries to think for you. It takes the words out of quotes. It tries to think. It tries to do the thinking for you, and it wants to be smarter than you. And I don't like it when my tools think they're smarter than I am. It's
Definitely something to be skeptical of, brother, for sure. And yeah, I got to get going in just a minute, but I just want to just plug, if I could, just for those who do want to know more about my work, specifically on technocracy, you can pick up my books. The one most relevant to this conversation is How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State, which you can download for free on my website at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. There's a free audiobook there and a free PDF, and it's available in Spanish, German, French, and English, of course. And yeah, you can learn more about my views on technocracy and more specifically solutions that I think that might be available to us. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man, and giving me a chance to discuss Peter Thiel. I hope more people will look into Peter Thiel, because it seems like there's a lot of people in independent media who don't want to talk about him and his influence.
Yeah. What are your best websites, Derek?
Theconsciousresistance.com is where I put out my weekly reports, my podcasts, interviews, and stuff like that, including my interview with Ron Paul. And then I write weekly articles at thelastamericanvagabond.com.
And you've also got an event next week.
Yeah, we're doing the People's Reset in Morelia, Mexico, Central Mexico next week, January 29th. So if anybody sees this on time, there's still time to come in person. If you can't, we are streaming the entire event for free. So it's always posted online for free on their website, thepeoplesreset.org, thepeoplesreset.org.
Yeah, I can't promise this will be out by then, but there's a lot of good stuff out there. Derek, I
Yeah,
think we covered a lot.
I appreciate it.
Anyway, please like my novel, or please like the video, subscribe to this channel. Go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Go check out my Substack, and go to buy me a coffee to support my show. And thank you, Derrick Broze. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.